What's up? I am in the office, I'm doing some work, but I actually got a question from one of my staff, which I'm gonna answer and explain. And actually, I think this is a good thing to share to all of my staff, but also some of you who may be curious about this topic. So the question was, he asked me to explain how the budgeting for the operating of the business of the school works. So I'm gonna explain this. Now I'm going to get a whiteboard here because I'm more of a visual guy, and this is going to help me explain it a little bit better, I think. So I'm just going to clear this out. Got some plants here, so I'm just going to move the plants and put a whiteboard up here for you guys. Now I've seen a few vloggers do videos like this, and I actually really appreciate how they break it down for us. So I'm going to do the exact same thing for you guys. So the question is how the budgeting and the operating system for financially works for the school. So I'm gonna explain it here. I actually had to explain this to my accountant as well, who hadn't necessarily seen a system like this before, but this system helps me. To be honest, it does make it harder for the accountant because he has more work to do, but it actually makes it easier for me to track things. So this is how it goes. So we run on a fortnightly cycle. So we got every 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a cycle. Now every 2 weeks, what we do is we have one bank account where all income from the school comes in. So we have one account. So we call this the incoming. That's the incoming account. All money goes in to here. So whether it's FPOS, cash we deposit into there, bank transfers, PayPal, everything like that, all the invoices, all goes into the same incoming account. Every 2 weeks, at the end of our cycle, what we do is we transfer out the money into a number of different accounts. So we split it up like this. I don't know if you can see green very well there, but I'll show you guys. So we split it up like this. A certain percentage goes into tax account. That's set. That includes GST and tax. That way we don't run out like when it comes tax time, when it comes time to pay the BAS or the end of financial year tax, we have the tax on hand. Because there's nothing more stressful than getting a tax bill and not having the money to pay it. So we plan ahead for this, and there's a certain percentage calculated with a little bit of extra just in case goes into tax. There's also an account for rent, which covers the rent for the studio, rent for the events that we run, rent for private lessons and all that kind of stuff, all this space that we need, and also outgoings. Yeah, so our bills, our power, water, telephone, internet, those kinds of stuff go in here. Yeah, so that goes into a separate account, and I do that actually based off a percentage of the total incoming. Yeah, so this is based off a percentage, and this is also based off a percentage. Then the third account that we do is it's wages and subcontractors. So I'm going to just call this wages. Yeah. So we also have people who are on the books as employees, and we have people who work as subcontractors, and we pay the invoices for that as well. So that goes into an account here, which is also worked off an operating percentage of the incoming. Then anything that's left over goes in anything that's left over goes into an operating account. Yeah? So the operating account is money that we use for unforeseeable expenses that come up, ad hoc expenses, refunds. Sometimes we get refund requests, and look, we always do our best to process refund requests, all reasonable refund requests. That comes out of operating. Okay, so here we usually use this. We do this also based on what's left over. So we put surplus. I'm going to put surplus here. That's what's left over after we've taken out all the percentages. Yeah, all the percentages for wage, rent, and tax. Yeah. So leftover goes into operating, and that's what we use on a fortnightly basis. Now, what sometimes happens, what we do every fortnight, what we do, just before we do all this split, I go into the operating account and I empty it. I take out all the money out of the operating account and I put whatever's left. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's barely anything. Depends on the type of month that we had and what expenses popped up. But all of that goes into, I'm gonna put this as save. All that goes into like either a term deposit saving account or it gets invested into something else, something to make that money actually go to work. So each fortnight, this goes back down to 0. And then we do all these splits and then this goes back up based on the surplus into the operating account. Now, this is why certain things are important operationally. The reason why we do it like this is because reducing this back down to 0 every fortnight allows me to keep a close eye on how we're operating, whether we're operating lean, whether we're doing irresponsible expenses or there's too many unforeseen expenses. It allows me to keep sort of a tabs on the health of the business and also to see if there's anything that we need to change in the business, if that makes sense. Obviously, the reason why we do tax is so that we're prepared. The reason why we do rent is we have expenses, we need to cover those, we're prepared for those. The reason why we do wages is because we need to be prepared for that as well, so make sure that there's enough in the budget to run that. So these come out first, then comes the operating expenses. Now, any discretionary expenses like that come up, if there's not enough in the operating account, we can't do it. So for instance, we go, oh, we need a new computer for the reception desk. We won't buy that computer unless the operating expenses surplus can cover it. If it can't, we have to wait. That's pretty much the bottom line. We have to wait. Now, this is why certain things throw us off. So if some kind of expense comes up, which is unexpected, that there's not enough here, that we can't avoid paying, like I don't know, say the roof falls in and we need to get it fixed, then we need to either hope that there's enough in the operating account, or we do have a backup emergency fund. So this goes in savings, but there's also from savings, there's an emergency. I'm gonna circle that in red just in case. That's an emergency, right? So we can go back from the emergency back into the operating if we need to. Now, all of this may seem too overly complicated, and I don't know how you guys do it in your personal lives and in your business, but I find that for me, this is the best way for me to keep a close eye on how things are operating and whether there's something that we need to change in the business. Now, this is why it's difficult for us, for my staff. This is going to be a quick message to my staff. This is why it's difficult for us when you don't invoice or do your timesheets on time, because we run on an operating fortnightly cycle. If, say, you don't invoice or do your timesheets on time, what happens is we have to carry that over to the next fortnight. And the problem with that is it throws off the percentage of wages. Yeah. So the surplus in these, so after we pay wages, after we pay rent, outgoings, the surplus of that goes into the surplus of this. So we usually pay out of here. So what happens is if you don't do your timesheets on time, sometimes there's not enough in the wages percentage to pay you. That's why we need to undo all that kind of stuff, and that's why it takes time. So the bookkeeper takes time to do that. Myself, I have to go through all the approval process for all that as well. That's why it's important to get everything done on time, and that's why also there's delays if you don't get it done on time as well. And as far as discretionary expenses, so sometimes my staff are like, why can't we pay for this right now? And the reason why is because of all this this stuff, this system. Now again, is it 100% necessary to operate this way? No, it's not. But I have run businesses before where I didn't do things like this, and it was always a guessing game, and you don't know from day to day or week to week how things are going to go. And I found that doing this way has actually helped me a lot, which allows me to focus on operating the business and growing the business and serving my students and serving my staff and our community, building our community. Otherwise, if I was always worrying about how all this went, then it would be hard. Of course, again, it makes life difficult for my accountants. So thank you guys, Dom and Ivana, thank you guys for your work. But that's what we pay them to do, right? So we don't pay them to make their life easier. They're supposed to make our life easier. So this makes our life easier, so they sort of have to operate around our system. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. That's a little bit of insight into it. I was reluctant as to whether I was going to actually share this or not, but I think it's good to shed some light. Anyway, that's it. Catch you later.